Russian forces in Kursk trapped in Ukrainian pockets, 40,000 troops south, 2 brigades nearly annihilated. Fierce fighting at mine tunnel, no 3 U.S. aid to Ukraine strategically calculated. The flames of war continue to blaze across Ukraine. In this episode of Strategic Observe, let's dive into the latest twists and turns on the battlefield. Ukraine's double encirclement delight, Russian troops shrink from 40,000 to 10,000. The Ukrainian forces have skillfully set up 2 large encirclements in Kursk, ready to tighten the net. Originally, the Russians had amassed 40,000 troops in the area, but they've already been cut in half. At the current rate of attrition, they might lose another 10,000 soon. With no other options, the Russian Federal Security Service, commanding this massive force, aimed at the weakest link in the Ukrainian defense, but they fell right into Ukraine's trap, ending up in 2 pockets. On the left pocket, Russian forces concentrated 2 brigades, nearly 10,000 light troops, to launch a fierce attack on Ukraine's 103rd Territorial Defense Brigade. The Russian 51st Airborne Brigade clashed intensely with the Ukrainian 103rd near Snagos, but couldn't break through. Seeing the 51st struggle, the Russians brought in the 155th Naval Brigade from the Western Front for reinforcement. The Ukrainian 103rd fought valiantly at Panasovka, covering the main force's successful retreat from Krasnodiarbursko and Komarovka in the northwest. Unfortunately, over 30 soldiers were captured. Deploying lightly equipped territorial defense units on such a brutal front line is like sending sheep into a lion's den. Subsequently, the Russian 51st Airborne and 155th Naval Brigades attacked Lyubimovka from the north and south, but were met with fierce firepower from Ukraine's 22nd Mechanized and 82nd Airborne Brigades. The Russians obediently marched into the left pocket. The root cause: overconfident Russian company and platoon commanders underestimated the enemy. They assured their soldiers that the Ukrainians would flee at the first sign of attack. While the Russians were in disarray, another Ukrainian force stealthily crossed the southwestern border of Kursk, capturing Novi Put. They then charged forward from Veselo, reaching the southern outskirts of Glushkovo on September 14th, facing virtually no resistance. Despite having a 2 to 3 times numerical advantage and air superiority in Kursk, along with the ability to deploy long-range glide bombs, drones, and ample logistics, the Russian battle situation is worrisome. Since August, 2 Russian naval infantry brigades have been nearly wiped out. Even with reinforcements who are brave and battle-hardened, turning the tide seems unlikely. Adding to their headaches, most of the Russian artillery are cumbersome towed guns, hard to maneuver quickly. They're often destroyed by Ukrainian drones before reaching the front. The Russian forces in Kursk can't keep up with the Ukrainian offensive tempo. Their numerical superiority is practically useless. In summary, there's a 50% chance that the Russians will lose over 10,000 paratroopers and infantry and forfeit large swaths of southwestern Kursk. Not to mention, in the early hours of September 16th, the Russian local government, in a state of panic, ordered the emergency evacuation of civilians between the border and Kopmishkin area spanning over 1,000 square kilometers. Clearly, the Russians have noticed Ukrainian forces amassing near the border, brewing a new offensive. While everyone's eyes are glued to Krasnohorivka, the real crisis is down south at Hurhivka on the N15 highway and 50 kilometers further south at Vulechi. If these fall, southern Donetsk is lost. In recent months, Zelensky has poured massive resources into Kharkiv and Kursk, leaving the Volodar front stretched thin. The Russian troops, previously battered here, are now finding their footing. Last winter, the Russian Eastern Group tried to storm Volodar, but were decimated by Ukrainian artillery from elevated positions, their armored units picked off one by one. Annihilated, even their brigade-level artillery units weren't spared. In September, as the Russian Central Group went all in attacking Krasnohorivka, the Eastern Group wasn't slacking off either. Still wary of a frontal assault on Volodar, they opted for feints and flanking maneuvers. West of Volodar, Ukrainian forces originally held strongholds like Zoloda Naiva and Prekistivka along the T-0509 highway. Unexpectedly, the Russians launched a surprise attack, easily seizing Prekistivka and pushing west. This cut the 30-kilometer supply line between Volodar and Velika Novosilka in half, putting Ukrainian communications with Western allies in jeopardy. On Volodar's eastern flank, Ukrainians had firmly held the 00532 highway and a vast area 7 kilometers east. However, the Russians spared no expense, taking a month to capture Novokhilivka. The Ukrainians have now completely withdrawn from this area. Crucially, the Russians, after immense effort, captured Kostiantynivka. Coinciding with fierce battles at Krasnohorivka, the Ukrainians were stretched thin. Seizing the moment, the Russian Eastern Group concentrated forces to assault the 00532 highway, eventually severing Volodar's eastern supply line. Despite this, Volodar's Ukrainian defenses remain robust. As Donetsk's second fortress after Krasnohorivka, Volodar is no mere foxhole. This towering complex of high-rise steel and concrete buildings perched on high ground is impregnable, complete with the eastern Villa district and the southern Pavlivka industrial zone serving as forward positions. Even if supply lines on both flanks are cut, Volodar can still be supplied via backroads. Bolstered by Ukrainian fortresses like the southern Donbas Mine No 1, Mine No 3, and defensive works at Vadian. Currently, the Russians have taken Mine No 1, 10 kilometers north of Volodar, and Vadian further north. Under normal circumstances, with ample Ukrainian troops, equipment, and ammunition, the Russians would have slim chances of breaching these defenses. Unfortunately, Ukrainian main forces have shifted north, leaving this front undermanned. Now, the Russians are assaulting Mine No 3, 4 kilometers west of Vodian, aiming to cut off Vuhledar's supplies entirely. Though the mine area isn't large, it boasts a building complex 1 kilometer long and 300 meters wide. On September 15th, the Russians deployed glide bombs multiple times with little effect. The Ukrainians have built intricate underground defenses here. If the Russians want to seize the spot, they'll likely pay with hundreds of casualties. From the Russians' actions on the 14th, their attack on Mine No 3 is textbook. Massive artillery bombardment followed by tank units of 3 to 4 vehicles advancing in columns into the mining area. Drone footage shows it's like a live exam for Field Military Academy cadets. In the footage, Russian tanks maintain formation, the lead tank clearing the path, followers keeping just the right distance. Even if the lead tank is hit, the rest can maneuver around, avoiding a total wipeout. The tank columns frequently change direction to dodge Ukrainian fire. Despite the Ukrainians' best efforts, they had minimal success. In the end, only one Russian tank was destroyed, the rest reached the mining complex. Fierce urban combat continues at Mine No 3 if the Russians take it. Voldar's fate becomes even more precarious. Volodar is critical to Hirohivka, which in turn affects the entire southern Donetsk front. That's why the Ukrainian General Staff is laser-focused on Hirohivka. The West knows Russia inside out. Providing Ukraine with missiles to strike Russian soil seems like a military decision, but it's a political gambit. Once missiles land on Russian territory and stir up public sentiment, the fallout could be beyond what Ukraine and the West anticipate. What's the Russian temperament? Russian social psychologists like Rosen note that when their homeland is attacked, Russians either rally fiercely or spiral into panic. Either outcome favors Putin. Actor news agency's editor-in-chief Yurovsky nailed it. Attacking Russian territory only unites Putin's supporters further. We've seen it before. Every time Ukrainian drones hit Russian borders, Putin's approval ratings there spike. The Ukrainian offensive in Kursk even helped Putin's governor secure higher election support. If Ukrainians think striking Russian soil will turn the people against Putin, they're sorely mistaken. Meanwhile, Western leaders grapple not only with domestic opinion and political pressures, but also with Russia's reactions, weighing all sides before making decisions. To strike or not to strike, that is indeed the question. The recent U.S.-U.K summit was downplayed by British press officers as an open dialogue, signaling that weapon declassification has been indefinitely postponed. In plain terms, everyone's waiting for the UN General Assembly, trying to build momentum before making announcements. But delaying declassification until the month's end is virtually meaningless. Soon, the Russian Central Group will assault Krasnohorivka's fortified positions. The Eastern Group will attack Mine No 3, and Vuhledar's permanent fortifications are under threat. Russian Su-34s taking off from home bases can still bomb unrestricted using glide bombs. If Ukraine can't hold and loses Krasnohorivka along with its main forces, what's the point of declassifying weapons then? The West treads, cautiously wary of crossing Russia's red lines. Medvedev's warnings still echo, and Russian Ambassador Antonov openly stated, if the conflict escalates, nuclear war could engulf the U.S. mainland. With such alarming rhetoric, it's no wonder the West often talks big but acts small on Ukraine. Adding to the complexity, internal divisions within the West are becoming more apparent. France strives to prevent escalation, fearing a spark could ignite World War III. The U.S. outwardly aids Ukraine, but advances cautiously. The White House's policy is steered by moderates like Sullivan, support Ukraine but avoid uncontrolled conflict. Military aid trickles slowly, much to Zelensky's frustration. Is it really logistical complexities or intentional delays? From the U.S. perspective, safeguarding Ukraine isn't the ultimate goal, protecting America is. If conventional aid can push Russia to ceasefire, they'll provide it. If not, they'll slow down, nudging Ukraine toward negotiations. The Biden administration's bottom line is to prevent the war from escalating to a point that affects the U.S. with this in mind. It's clear why U.S. aid to Ukraine keeps stalling and why sanctions against Russia seem strong but lack firm implementation. Sullivan elaborated extensively on the reasons for aid delays, eager to avoid being branded as an obstacle, but can't escape accusations of double-dealing. Zelensky's criticism that the U.S. says one thing and does another hits the mark. Ukraine's battlefield situation is clearly a race against time, yet the West continues calculating its own interests. Europe's economy is several times larger than Russia's, but Russia's artillery firepower is 3 to 10 times that of Ukraine's. Relying solely on the West's half-hearted delays won't turn the tide. It's understandable that Western countries balance national interests, domestic politics, and international dynamics when considering aid to Ukraine. But knowing Ukraine urgently needs assistance and still using excuses to shirk responsibilities is morally questionable. Facing Ukraine's plight, the West should step up, not play it safe and shirk heavy responsibilities. Ukraine desperately needs ammunition, armored vehicles, and manpower. Only by making a stand on the battlefield can they awaken the West's conscience. War is no game behind it lie countless shattered lives and families. We track the battlefield not to grab attention but to awaken reason and conscience. If you appreciate our efforts, please like, share, and subscribe to this channel. See you next time.